Today I'm giving away my secrets on how I name my abstract pieces. When you take a look at a piece like this, or that one, you might wonder, how do you come up with a proper title for such a piece? Stick around and I'll give you the blueprint. One of the questions that people ask me the most is definitely this one. Hey Seb, how do you come up with names for your pictures? And to be honest with you, whenever this question comes my way, I'm always a little flattered. Because a lot of time and reflection goes into properly naming every piece before it gets published. And not to toot on my own horn, but I definitely think that my naming strategies when it comes down to my abstract art are one of my strong traits as an artist. My art absolutely lives in the abstract realm. Bubble arrangements are as abstract as it gets. And the challenge for any abstract artist, whatever your art form may be, photographer, painter, watercolor, sculptor, the challenge is to take something that carries no meaning whatsoever in the world of senses and actually give it a proper meaning that helps connect the piece that means nothing and actually graft a meaning onto it. And today I'm going to be sharing my strategies so that you can take those home and actually apply them and see how that works for you. When it comes down to naming my pieces, my core strategy is very simple. Less is more. I'd rather be suggestive and leave it up to your imagination to fill in the blanks. In other words, I don't want to spoon feed you the meaning, I just want to plant a seed in your mind and then let you do the work. Now here's step one of my method, which I entitle, What's the Word? I call step one, What's the Word? Because that's literally the question I ask myself when I take a look at a picture for the first time when I'm looking to name it. The question is, what's the one word that this piece evokes in me? Can be an emotion like fear, worry, love, passion. Can be an adjective like cold, fluffy, lively. Can also be a place like paradise or jungle. Essentially, I'm just looking for the one word that best describes the piece. Or in other words, what's the soul of this piece? Now that we just went through step one where we defined the one word that carried the soul of the picture, step two might feel a little backwards or counterintuitive because we're going to make sure that we don't use the word that we identified in step one. Here's an example of how I avoided using the keyword I had identified for a piece. Now with this picture, the one word that came to my mind was majestic. Calling it majestic scenery would have been extremely bland and one-dimensional. Doesn't leave much up to the imagination. Yet the massive bubble and the lush green colors truly has a majestic feeling to me. But instead of going for the obvious, I decided to call it the garden beyond the road less traveled. See, it's the reward at the end of the journey that only a select few get to see. Only the ones who are brave enough to take the road less traveled get to see what lies beyond. Reality is that a simple title just does not offer any sense of accomplishment or reward because you don't have to work too hard in order to get it. And that's why, if you take a look at the 350 pictures or so that I've published so far, almost none of them have just one word as a title. And if they do, it's usually a word that I made up, like isolationism or rainbow spinner. The idea is that if you create a word, you own that word, and then you dictate its meaning. Okay, so now that we've identified the soul of the piece, we want to connect the composition with a proper title. I do that by crafting a story based on the visual features of my pieces. Like for instance, is a composition dark or colorful? Is it busy? Is there a lot of empty room? Are the bubbles huge? Are they tiny? What's the dominant color? And those elements are all clues that will help craft a meaningful story between composition and emotion. In order to best exemplify this, let's take a look at a few of my pictures and reverse engineer the naming process. Now the pieces that I'm going to show you are all some of my best sellers of all time, and I truly believe that the link between the great composition and the title that bridges the gap between the emotion is what allowed for those pieces to become my best sellers. So this one here is called They Came From the Breach. And for me, the one word that summarized this picture was dread, or a feeling of impending doom. You have those big figures on top that are sort of looming over everything. There's a threat, and it feels like that threat is organized. That threat is undefined. So when it comes down to the word they, who are they? What do they want? Where do they come from? We know they come from the breach. What is beyond that breach? What are they breaching through? How did this breach come to be? Those questions are all left unanswered. By leaving questions unanswered, I'm leaving you just enough space for you to fill in the blanks. In the end, it's a dreadful and dark piece that ends up being bolstered by an elliptical title that leaves it up to you to figure out what the hell is going on. For this piece entitled Journey into the Subconscious, I was inspired by the word duality. As you can see, the left is pitch black while the right side is extremely colorful. And there's a clear break between both sections. And there's no gradient, there's a clear break between the dark and the colorful parts of this composition. And in the middle, you have those bubbles that seem to be traveling or bridging the gap between both dark and the colorful sections. What direction are they traveling in? Are they traveling into the darkness? Are they traveling into the color? I don't have the answer to that myself. It's up to you to decide. Now the concept of the subconscious refers to this mystical place where we don't really know what's happening. In your subconscious, your brain does stuff that you're not even aware of. Could be the darker parts of you, could be the more colorful parts of you. And really, it's up to you to decide when you take a look at this piece whether the journey into the subconscious goes into the color or goes into the darkness. As you can see, I'm a huge fan of just pushing you in one direction and then leaving it up to your imagination to fill in the blanks. Okay, so now that you know my rules, let's take a look at how you can sometimes bend the rules in some specific situations. Now for this piece entitled Swirling into Bliss, I was conflicted between two words, swirl and bliss. The swirl is sort of obvious. If you take a look at the composition, you can actually see that the billows are sort of in a swirling motion. And the unity of the bubble cluster in the middle, like with all of the colors, evoked a sense of bliss in me. Swirl, bliss. Well then why not blend all of it into one and call it Swirling into Bliss? I like that title because once again, it's suggestive. Now you might say, no, it's descriptive. You're describing a swirl and you're describing bliss. And you might have a point. Reality is, you can't physically swirl into bliss. It requires some mental gymnastics in order to figure out what swirling into bliss can actually look like. And that's what the title proposes. Now that I've told you what my secrets to naming my abstract pieces are, remember, less is more. Identify that one word that best summarizes your piece. Make sure you don't use that word in order to not be too obvious. And finally, craft a little story that connects your composition along with the emotion that you want to convey. If you follow those steps, I promise you, you'll definitely step up your naming game. That about wraps it up for this video. I hope that you've managed to pick up a trick or two when it comes down to naming abstract pieces. And if you've enjoyed any of the pieces that were discussed today and you are considering putting any of them up on your wall, I've added some links to them in the description down below. And now, before I go, I want to open it up to you. If you're an artist of any kind, what are your naming strategies? Do you have some tips that you can share with us and that we can learn from? And if you do, leave them in the comments down below and we can all learn from you. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video and that you learned something. Don't forget to like the video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. And until next time, follow your passions and follow the flow.